My glasses are dirty. Hey guys. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Let me check to make sure everything looks good. Turn it down. I wasn't planning this, but Sam and I went on 2 walks. I had a bike ride, and so I was gonna look through this anyways, and I decided to just go ahead and do it together, like I do sometimes. Saves time. That way I'm not looking at stuff twice. You don't want to see my messy room, do you? I don't think it's messy. It's just I got to get rid of some stuff. And I don't know about anybody else, but you try and use a buy-seller trade site right now, and it's like crickets. Nobody is there. I don't know what's going on with all that. So that's kind of weird. I also wanted to mention, be aware that I'm aware, and you should be aware, that you have channels that are following you that are AI. The question is, are they put out by a person, people? Um, the goal in this time, and this is what I'm talking about this because I just saw a video about this, and every time I look something up or I plan something ahead, I see a video about it like immediately, which is just weird, right? If it's an actual person, how are they doing that so quickly? And so I want you to know, that I guess the question would be, are they AI or are they people doing it? And I think it's both, like I always do, depending on your type of account. But it seems like accounts that don't have sponsors, like myself, smaller channels that do live stream and make videos and make content and aren't monetized, we just do it for whatever reason we're doing it. Um, and we're not, getting paid. Channels that are below probably 20,000 subscribers probably are all being targeted by AI bots at this point just to kind of clean us up and sweep us up because they can't really fit us into a category. The algorithm doesn't know where to put us. And so, to a computer system, that would look messy. Um, the same thing is happening in our world. Again, I'm talking about this because I just saw a video about it and I'm thinking of doing a deep dive into this topic. And almost the second I thought about it and I don't even think I had looked anything up yet. Somebody posted a video about it. And so, that keeps happening and it can be kind of creepy, but it's also like my goal with most things is to figure out why it's happening. I don't have to have a reason for everything in life, but if it's not organic, then I do. That means I can take it apart and figure it out and figure out how it works. So that's why I play with the algorithms a bit. And the goal, with people is the same at this point because everything is so automated, you don't need as many of us. And like I said before, these days, if you're going to infiltrate a country, you don't want to ruin the resources, you don't want to spoil the goods, so to speak. And so you will try to either convert the population to your ways of doing things, or you will try to eliminate them. So you have actual people, again, doing this who have bought up all our land and done these things. But, anyways, to get back on track, people become a liability if you're not producing and you're consuming more than you produce. And they look at production as physical, tangible things. Art doesn't count. Content like this usually doesn't count unless you're spending a lot, like, putting it all back into the system. But so that's the same thing is happening in everyday life. They want us to self delete, they want us to erase ourselves from the game board, so to speak. And I'm going to do a video about that, but be aware that there are channels following you that are AI. There are channels following me that are AI. They take my content. Like, it's like my devices listen to me. The prayer that I made up about the full armor of God, somebody else posted, which again, I don't mind. That's not the point. The point is when you're alone or you think you're alone, these things should not be intruding upon your solitude. especially if you're communing with, the one who made you, however you choose to do that. So, I wanted to just touch on that. Be aware that I'm aware. I know that accounts that follow me and that I follow are AI, and I follow them because they're following me, and I want to keep an eye on them and see what they're putting out. And some of them use real voices, like real people, some of them sound very similar. You can't tell they're AI, they're just smaller channels, but when they show you their face, it's kind of like almost a jokey thing, and you can tell it's AI because there is no theme. People have, like, we carry a certain theme about us, our personality, and that bleeds through in our creativity process. When the computer does that, you're not gonna see a theme across their channel. It's like a giant collage mess of stuff. You'll see a video that's done in this format, and then another one in this format, and then another one in a completely different one, and then you're like, "Wow, this person knows how to do all these things?" No, it's not that person. Again, it's AI, and one will look like it's done by a child, and then do you see what I'm saying? Anyways, I hope that you do, because in this time, these are all things that we need to be aware of. My goal is to stay solution centered. And so that's why we're going to dig into the Hopi survival kit. I actually bought it, it was $10, but I downloaded it, and I know we have to finish the book of Acts, which we're going to do. I tied up the Hopi prophecy videos. Um, and I like to rely on old literature because it can teach us something about the things that we're going through today. And for me, I'm blessed because whatever is happening all the time. And I have not went to the thrift store, the consignment shops down the road, in a long time. And again, this is a small town, so you find eclectic things. And so I found this book, Fire Upon the Earth, and it is about the spreading of Christianity. Now, what is synchronistic about this is I got it last year at some point, and I picked it up and decided I was going to read it, and I saw the little fires, and I'm like, "Oh, that's like the Holy Spirit thing, isn't it?" And I started reading it, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is what we're talking about right now. This is what we're going through, is the book of Acts." And I'm like, "Wow, I need to read some of this." And so I just want to read you an excerpt from this book. Because it talks a little bit about what it was like being a new, like, the first Christians, right? Hold, please. And so let me find the page. And we will skip over to the Hopi book. But this was so serendipitous that I wanted to read it to you. It says part one is the church conquers an empire, and it tells you about two empires. And it tells you about Augustus Caesar. Augustus, that's my dad's middle name. Okay, so should I read you from the beginning of that? Let me see. Yeah, I can read a few pages, and then we'll look at the Hopi book. Now, the Hopi book, it's not there's just chapter headings. There's no titles for the chapter in the table of contents, so we can't just peek and say, "Oh, this is about this. Let's go look at this." Um, so we're gonna have to actually go through it, and that's why, again, I bought it and figured we would just go through it. And I would just do extra videos in the evenings or figure something out to do, like, current events before the reading of that book. But let's check this out. Now, ironically enough, there's no date on this. I looked. This says Europe in the time of Constantine, and it gives you a map, which we know cartographers. It says by Norman Langford, illustrated by John Lear, the Westminster Press of Philadelphia. Printed in the United States. Oh, sorry, there's a year. Roman numerals. Oh, which I don't know if I remember those. I think that's 19. 50? I don't want to say for sure. Okay, so this is chapter 1, Two Empires, and I'm just going to read a couple pages for you. Hopefully it won't be too weird, but that's the only way to do this when I have the physical book. So, Two Empires. It says, on a couch of golden ivory stood a wax image of Augustus Caesar, conqueror of his world, founder and ruler of the Roman Empire. Below the couch with its image, Augustus himself lay resting as quiet as his statue. The name of Julius he had borrowed from his illustrious great uncle Julius Caesar. From now on, all future emperors of Rome would take it for a title, but no mortal ruler had ever before been called Augustus, the Majestic. It was a title for a god. My dad's name is Regus Augustus. Regi means king, kingly, and his middle name, Augustus, means the majestic. It just never stops. And my son's name, he named his son Roman. And my son's name is here too. This is so weird for me. I'm sorry. The lands he governed circled the Great Sea, the Mediterranean. Far countries that had long been cursed by war were now at peace because Augustus Caesar had conquered them. His legions patrolled the frontiers, ever on guard against invasion from the barbarous folk that lived beyond. No nation was at war with any other, for the majestic emperor ruled them all. Good evening. God bless. Good afternoon. Sorry. Roadways built to carry Roman armies also carried the wealth of the civilized world as merchants traveled safely across the empire. Now, again, we're getting into the time period, and there is this excerpt that you have to hear because this is the spreading of Christianity, and we were just talking about this. And ironically, I just plucked the book up one night and decided to sit down and read it. And I was like, wow, this is what we're doing videos on right now. So, Roman armies also carried the wealth of the civilized world as merchants traveled safely across the empire. Ships laden with rich cargo sailed the Mediterranean, where the Roman governors ruled. Men counted on justice being done. Full of gratitude, the assembly of the province of Asia had once framed a greeting for the birthday of Augustus. This day has changed the earth. The providence which rules over all has filled this man with such gifts for the salvation of the world as to make him the savior for us and for coming generations. Of wars he will make an end. It is impossible that one greater than he can ever appear. The birthday of God has brought to the world glad tidings. Hold, please. So Augustus Caesar is at this time is like the people love him, right? They are in love with him. They are adoring him. They are, they're in idolatry. They have placed him up as a god, which men and women, we tend to do this. In all the cities of Asia, it was ordered this greeting should be inscribed. Wow. Now the image on the couch stared with unseeing eyes of wax, and the eyes of the great man himself were sightless too, for death had put out the light. Below the couch, Augustus Caesar lay in his imperial coffin. All Rome turned out to watch the funeral. Crowds thronged the streets or climbed to the housetops under the hot September sun to see Augustus take his last journey through the streets of the city he had made so beautiful and great. An image of Augustus was made of gold. The golden age, anyone? This is so synchronistic that I just plucked this book up because there's nothing on the cover a little bit. But anyways, an image of Augustus made of gold was carried behind the coffin. Ugh. And with it were images of his ancestors and of famous Romans of other days. The procession paused by the temple built in honor of Julius Caesar. There, a tall, gaunt man named Tiberius, destined to be the successor of Augustus, delivered a speech. He praised the virtues that the late emperor had loved and practiced: his devotion to his country, his generosity, his frankness, his gifts as a ruler. The oration over, the procession moved slowly on until the dome of the imperial mausoleum came into view. The body of Augustus was laid on the funeral pile at a single signal. Centurions applied their torches. Okay. The flames leaped up at the same instant. An eagle was released to fly upward into the boundless sky. An eagle, a sign that the soul of Augustus had soared to heaven. The ashes were laid in the huge round mausoleum among the cypress trees. Soon afterward, the Roman Senate met and decreed that Augustus Caesar was now one of the little g gods of Rome. And it is a little g, that's why I said that, especially, I'm reading. So In the provinces of the empire, there was sorrow that so great a benefactor was gone. But as a little g god, he still might help and save his people. While he was yet alive, the Eastern folk who loved to make gods out of their heroes had paid him divine honors. Now that he was sublime in death, great cities would compete in building temples worthy of his name. And not only Augustus, but the Caesars after him who sat upon his throne would find themselves hailed as gods. They were gods and goddesses enough. There were gods and goddesses enough already. The imagination awoke at the very mention of their names: Hecate, Queen of the Night; Infernal Proserpine, never heard of that one; Queen Isis of Egypt; Zeus and Mars and Saturn. Perhaps some said these were but different names for one great little g god, but there was room for another, one whom all the nations of the empire should unite in worshiping. Hail Caesar! There was power in that name. Sweet odor of incense drifted heavenward, while loyal knees from east to west bowed low. About 15 years after the death of Caesar the Majestic, in a remote part of the empire, another man died and was buried under very different circumstances. It was in the time of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, who could have wanted nothing less than to get involved in a dispute among the Jews. Who could understand a stubborn nation that insisted on calling itself, quote unquote, the chosen people and classing all other nations together under the uncomplimentary name of, quote unquote, Gentiles? There was scarcely a city in the empire without a settlement of Jews, and everywhere they lived to themselves and followed the religion of their fathers. A riddle to everyone except those few Gentiles, the so called God-fearers, who attended the synagogue. It was Pilate's luck to be made governor of the Jewish homeland, and now sitting in court at Jerusalem, he had come to a decision about a case that baffled him. Hold, please. The local authorities had brought him a prisoner named Jesus, demanding that the death sentence be passed upon this man. Pilate's Roman sense of justice told him that the accused was innocent of any crime. It was not even clear to him just what the prisoner was charged with. Evidently, Jesus had claimed to be a son of the gods, quote unquote, as Pilate understood it. A feeling of uneasiness passed over Pilate. After all, there was such a thing as gods. The Jews, however, did not seem to think so. They taught that capital G God is invisible, and the story went around that they worshiped a spirit in an empty box. I'm sorry. The government did not greatly care what they worshiped so long as they paid their taxes and kept the peace. Rome had given them a license, as it had all other nations, to practice their own religion. Why could they not settle their disputes among themselves? The Jewish authorities were loudly declaring that Jesus had been guilty of blasphemy and ought to die. Something was also said about his claiming to be king of the Jews, quote unquote. That was more on Pilate's line. The government had to be careful about rebellions against Rome, and one never knew when the Jews would revolt. They did not share the general gratitude to Caesar. A glance at Jesus reassured Pilate. The man was quite alone, his own followers having deserted him. A glance at the crowd, however, shook the governor's confidence. There was surely danger of a riot if Pilate refused to do as he was asked. The safest course seemed to be to pass the death sentence, but this would scarcely be equal to the standards of Roman justice. With a feeling of disgust, Pilate uttered the fatal words, "Take him and crucify him. I wash my hands of this whole affair." Thus it was that Jesus was led out with two thieves who also had to be put up who also had to be put out of the wages then and nailed up on a cross. It was the most degrading punishment known, reserved for the lowest and most dangerous type of criminal. When evening came, a wealthy friend quietly removed the body of Jesus from the cross. Under the cover of night, he laid it in a tomb in a garden. A stone was rolled against the door. Hold, please. So we're reading this, and this is the perspective of a Roman soldier. So it's not a Jewish person, and it's somebody in the government, right? And it's like It would almost be the chief of police in in modern times. This is who is seeing and talking right now. So it's not from the Jewish perspective, and it's not from a Christ follower because they're all gone at this point in time. So it is from the Roman point of view. So again, they're like, we don't want to get in the middle of this. What do we got to do with your religion? Right? Like, this is your religion. If you want done with the guy, you take him and go elsewhere, and do what you think you need to do, but don't do it here, and I'm not gonna do it. But that didn't work. He wasn't able to ride the fence that way or remain diplomatic. It's the same reason people like Jordan Peterson don't come out and say they're a Christian, because he has so many people that he teaches that go to him that he can't offend any one of them. That's why it's very hard for a leader to have their own religion, right? And not have everybody else be that same religion, or they can't really claim one because you have a diverse group of people that are depending on you and you want them to trust you and the information that you're giving them. And then somebody like Jordan Peterson, you also want their money, right? And so you don't want to offend any of these people. And that's kind of the position that Pontius Pilate's in right now. And this is from his point of view at this moment. Okay. So he says, take him and crucify him. I wash my hands of this whole affair. And then they take him out. Okay. 7 weeks later, the city of Jerusalem was crowded with Jewish visitors from many lands who were attending the festival of Pentecost. So, this is like a state fair, right? Or it's like the Native Americans when they all get together for a powwow, and it's not a time of war, and the different nations, different tribes come together to trade and to learn things, sometimes to set up marriages to unite the two tribes, right? So you're going to have people there that speak different languages because they're from different lands. So here we go. 7 weeks later, the city of Jerusalem was crowded with Jewish visitors from many lands who were attending the festival of Pentecost. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, there was a commotion. A sound like rushing wind was heard, and stranger still, the sound of voices speaking in every language known to the visitors present at the scene. So that goes along with our Holy Spirit videos. This is from at least 50 years ago at this point, this book, okay? And even more to the point, this is from the Roman perspective, all right? And this is taking place in the book of Acts. And this is the book of Acts right here, okay? So this is the Holy Spirit being poured down on all flesh in the end days, like Christ said would happen. Let's not discuss where we're at in the end days right now. Let's just follow this. So, at about 9 o'clock in the morning, there was a commotion. A sound like rushing wind was heard, and stranger still, the sound of voices speaking in every language known to the visitors present at the scene. A crowd soon gathered where the disturbance was taking place and observed that the voices were those of 12 men standing in a group. What has happened now? Everyone wanted to know. And how is it that each of us hears those men speaking in his own language? Someone laughed. Those fellows are drunk. The voice of Peter, a former fisherman and a disciple of Jesus, rang out. This is where I like Peter because he has holy boldness now that he has the Holy Spirit. Everyone at Jerusalem, listen to my words. God has sent his Holy Spirit to speak to you. God is among you. He sent Jesus of Nazareth, and you killed him. But death could not hold him prisoner. Such a thing was impossible. God raised him from the dead, and we ourselves saw it. We, his disciples, are the witnesses. Let all Jews know this: God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, your Lord and your Messiah. Peter waited for the response. It came in the cry of many voices. What shall we do? Turn from your sins, Peter answered, and be baptized in the name of Jesus, so that your sins may be forgiven. Then the power of God will enter into you. Save yourselves while there is still time. As though they had got as though they had heard God speaking from heaven, 3,000 people believed Peter's words. They were baptized and joined the disciples. They listened to every word the disciples had to say. Hold, please. In a book like this, its topic and where and when it's taking place If somebody wanted to actually prove out or research if we're in Satan's short season, this is a good book for that because it's talking about how the gospel has already went out throughout the whole world. It's already went everywhere. These missionaries that say they're going to do this, that, and the other, I've already told you there's other stuff going on with that. But anyways, fascinating stuff. From that day, they prayed together and ate in one another's homes. Praying and eating together, they felt the presence of one who had died and broken out the grave. The power that can raise the dead was alive among them, and a strength greater than their own lifted them up from the death of sin. They shared their belongings, they sold their possessions, and brought the price to the disciples so that it might be given to the poor. That's how Christ lived. Okay? That's how he lived. The 3,000 soon became 5,000. The new faith was talked of in private homes and where men gathered at the temple. Leaders must be chosen. 7 men were elected as deacons to look after the needy. Still more believed, and wherever the believers went, the people of Jerusalem stopped to look and listen. The Jewish authorities at Jerusalem were alarmed. A new faith had sprung up almost overnight, and it was out of control already. The rulers threatened the disciples. When that failed, they whipped them. Finally, there came an outburst of fury, and Stephen, one of the 7 deacons and the first man to die for having faith in Jesus Christ, was done to death. It was a mistake. The believers fled from Jerusalem, where prison bars and lashes and perhaps death itself awaited them. But when they fled, they took their faith along, and wherever they went, they spoke of it. It was soon the talk of Palestine. So, do you see Palestine? There's a reason there's an anger, even if what we see on TV is fake, right? Actors, there is still truth there, right? Like we know this. And Palestine is hated by the synagogue of Satan. Instead of stamping out the new belief, the rulers had spread it throughout the country. But it was only the Jewish authorities who were disturbed. The Roman government took no part in the affair. Pilate had washed his hands of the matter and did not interfere again. Meanwhile, on the rocky and romantic island of Capri, off the coast of Italy, the aging Tiberius Caesar had set up his home. From there, he ruled the world around the Mediterranean Sea. No trifling rumors from far off Judea would reach him there, nor would he be likely to worry about them if they did. He had commanded his armies for a long time, and he knew how secure the Roman Empire was, more secure even than when Augustus died. A cold, suspicious man, more feared than loved, Tiberius ruled the world he knew, and he ruled it efficiently and well. He had the mutinies to deal with, and he had put them down by force. A new religion in Judea was not a thing to trouble him. Even in Jerusalem, the Romans did not take the new religion seriously. There seems to be a new kind of Jew, they thought, and they had long since given up trying to understand the Jews. That's funny. Now it says, this is the next chapter. It is Memoirs of an Apostle. And this is Paul. You get into Paul's journey, and then you get into more of Paul's journey. And this is about, if you read the end of Revelation, and it talks about the fall of Jerusalem, that already happened. And this is that time period. It is Acts in Rome, it taking place in there. There's a lot that goes on there. And then, through the eyes of the apostles, it's how they carry the Holy Spirit across everywhere. And see, then this map on the other side, on the flip side of the book, it shows you where they carried their faith. Okay. Now, I could keep reading this because people are here, but let's go ahead because the title says Hopi. We're going to go look at that too. And then you guys can tell me which one you like best and which one you want to focus on now. And then we can do the other one after that, if that works for everybody. You just got to let me know. You got to comment so I know. All right, I'm going to share a screen with y'all. Hopefully it'll be easy peasy. There we go. All right, let's see. I gotta make sure that. Here we go. Yeah, ta-da. Come on. Sometimes I have to go out and come back in to see if it's working. Ooh, come on. Can you guys see it? I can see it, but I can't see it on my, like, there we go. Okay. So these chapters, as I said, they don't tell you what they're about. So we're just gonna kind of go through and skim. Chapter 1, The Secret of Land and Life. Let me take a little sip. I should be drinking my water, but every now and again I have coffee. Not often, but I do. The Secret of Land and Life. Now, this is written by the gentleman. We looked at some of his own writings in the last video, the Hopi part 2 video, the conclusion of the prophecy part segment. And now, since we found this is how we got to that book, is he was talking about it, about how his survival kit is in this book. So it kind of flows because in the previous video, it was all about the prophecy, and this is how to survive in this time period, I guess. Okay. I'm not I'm not a native speaker, so I don't know the language. If I mess up, I'm gonna mess up. I apologize. So this is chapter 1, The Secret of Land and Life, and already I can't pronounce that. Tekwa Ikachi is the creed of the Hopi traditionalists. In its English translation, what it means is blending with the land and celebrating life. The traditionalists' aim has always been to achieve this for themselves and everyone else in the world. About AD 1100, the way to accomplish it was given to them by Masao, the awesome guardian of the earth. For the next 750 years, the people blended and celebrated, living in peace and happiness through a Spanish intrusion that lasted for 140 years, through constant depredations by Apaches and Navajos, and through most of the normal problems human beings face in life. With this impressive reputation, the Hopi are broadly known today as the peaceful people, and outsiders living in a world beset with turmoil often wondered how they achieved it. It was only as this present century began that the Hopi situation changed. As the white government steadfastly turned the people away from the Masau's teachings, peace and happiness was turned away with it, and doing what was necessary to achieve the Hopi aim for the rest of the world was frustrated as well. You see how that happened there, though? You see how when they were lured away, just like I talk about the white people being taken off of their farms and off of the land and now subsisting and depending upon, this beast system, this, kraken, whatever they want to call the whole thing, behemoth. Um, as soon as they turned away from those ways, the natural ways, and celebrating together, even though they were different, different tribes, soon as they stopped doing that and going and being pulled from that, then the peace in their own nation of their people was also disrupted. So you see, when you try to go against, it's like if you tried to paddle up a current, right? It's not easy. A lot of times when you're in a boat, you let the current just kind of carry you, so that's the less work you got to do, right? But if you're trying to paddle upstream, you're going to have a heck of a time. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with that. When you go against nature, you're gonna end up getting flipped over at some point in time. Like that's just it, we are not sovereign in that way, right? We're sovereign over this, over ourselves and the land that we walk upon, you know, and we do have dominion, but we can't push nature in that way. We can ask and we can do certain things, but going against like natural law, things that are established, things that are in stone, I guess is what I'm gonna say. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so as the white government steadfastly turned the people away from Masal's teachings, peace and happiness was turned away with it. Um, We find that human acts and choices have a powerful effect on the direction, pace, and intensity of what happens on the grand stage of life. This is why I said when I realized that my personal problems in life were kind of being vomited out in different ways in like a bigger way, that's when I knew for sure like I had to do some type of public repentance and penance and try to match that energy, but in a more productive, good, try to be in a good way, to help people in this time because it is a strange time to be alive. Okay. They also affect the timing. Even little notice things can do this. In testimony to this truth, the following incident in Hopi history is one of several that has delayed by nearly a century the delivery of an urgent secret of survival to a world that has been recklessly endangering itself. In the year 1921, General Stoic Yukio, Yukiyuma, chief of the Hopi village of Hotevilla, was imprisoned for the eighth time in 14 years. Sometimes he was locked up in cells with murderers, robbers, and child harmers, individuals who had committed the most appalling crimes in America. He even spent a year on the infamous Alcatraz Island. That is horrible. His offense in each instance was his refusal to sign a United States government paper giving it permission to remove village children from their homes and educate them in a distant boarding school. Orphan trains, anyone? Do you think they gave those children back? I've told you my own personal stories about this, and if you they're back there if you want to hear them, peppered all throughout. Wild, and they basically they wanted to kidnap their children to civilize them, right? Why do we try to force everyone to do things our way? The natives had been here first. Obviously, things were working for them for thousands of years. Why did someone else feel like they had that right to come in and interfere? Like, thank you, Cariana, for answering. I'm glad you're here. I don't understand why we do this to people. And like, even from a Christian perspective, now I might be a Christ follower, but that doesn't mean I'm aligned with I don't wanna be lumped up in with people who are warmongers and, people who use the name of God just because they wanna go do brutal things to other men, women, and children. I'm not for that, and true Christ followers are pacifists. We don't want that type of it's just not good. When you force a conversion, when you try to force a lifestyle conversion, the way people are doing things and what they're comfortable with, eventually that's gonna like boomerang back on you in a bad way because it's not a real conversion of the heart, and they're gonna resent the one that is making them do things against their will, and that's all that's gonna happen from that. So he is spending all this time being persecuted because he doesn't want to give the village children away to be kidnapped, basically. Like, how would you feel about your child being taken by one of the people here from Brazil saying, I want to go to Brazil? I'm taking your child here because it needs to be more Brazilian. I would say, excuse me, no, you're not no, you're not taking my child. Somebody wanted to send my child to New Zealand. Like they kept trying to separate me and my youngest. It finally worked, but I'm not that kind of mom that he can't have a life as he gets older, but it was just weird, like, everybody wants the children, and we're gonna talk about that too in a video coming up. We're gonna do a deep dive into a company, but I didn't wanna do that right now because sometimes you have to let your cup be refilled, especially if you're looking at dark things. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, it says at all Hotevilla village fathers rejected the demand and were similarly imprisoned. Only old people, mothers, and a few older children were left behind to continue as best as they could. Oh, that's terrible. There were no trials concerning these actions and consequences. Parents were not asked why they objected. Justice was simple and direct. Over a period of years, Hotevilla fathers were at intervals herded 40 miles to the agency jail in Keams County, where they were chained in pairs and then sent out to work on reservation roads in the hottest and the coldest weather. Burdened in this way, they labored with picks, hammers, and explosives. At night, they were chained in groups of six so that if one of them had to go to the bathroom, the others had to come along. That way, they couldn't escape. We're going to skip through some of this. Well, you know what? Maybe we're not because it's actually kind of relevant to the things we're seeing today. So if people come in and out, like I'm not going to pay attention to that. Um, I guess we'll go ahead and continue because unfortunately, for whatever reason, I'm led to certain books and certain materials that have nuggets in them for us today in our time. So we're just gonna follow that and keep following that trail. Ugh, okay. Each time they were freed and returned home, they were arrested again and imprisoned. It was a vicious process that went on for more than 2 decades. Why the Hauteville men never gave in is both a miracle and a question demanding an answer. You know what's amazing is that even after all that persecution, they still put out this information because they want to help us. After centuries of not sharing their belief system and their faith system, they're being open about it because they know there isn't enough of them to carry things on. And I think they're trying to tap into maybe the children who were taken because certain things are in your blood and in your DNA and it has memory and that can be generational. So it's very possible that someone reading this could feel that pull. So, I'm sure it was very altruistic of them. It was very charitable of them to do this even after they were treated this way. Okay, why the Hauteville? Since U.S. soldiers and Navajo policemen took the children by armed force anyway, nothing justified the imprisonments. Wow. But what the United States government really wanted was to break the last of the Hopi spirit and resistance to conversion. From the year 1906, Hauteville was at the top of the administration's most wanted list, and its steadfastness and refusal was an embarrassment to the government. They wanted to save face. Long before this day in 1921, the other Hopi villages had capitulated. Even the mother village, Arabi, had lowered its flag. Only Hauteville stood firm, and Ukiuma was its backbone. Vengeful school principals lashed out by entering Hauteville homes uninvited, verbally abusing parents, smashing pottery used for cooking and eating, and cutting blankets needed for winter warmth into shreds. It reminds me of the guys that wear the white hoods, and it also reminds me of Vikings. Why do some men want to hurt the weakest and most vulnerable among us? And it's males usually, almost always. It's men want to hurt women and children. But why is that? What kind of satisfaction do you get in that? There's no sport in that. There's no game in that because there is no contest. Weak men do things like that, and it's sad. It really is. Okay. Well, they made surprise winter raids so fleeing children could be tracked in the snow. Even though Hopi children received no physical discipline at home, the white teachers whipped the children in class whenever they felt an example needed to be set. When schools were placed near a village, even little and poorly clothed children were forced to walk to classes in midwinter across rocky mesa terrain that was covered with snow and ice. Reminds me of my mom's stories. She had her stepmother, adopted mother, whatever she was. My mom was an orphan. Her mom, like, we don't know our past. They would cut out cereal boxes because of the cardboard and put them in the bottoms of their shoes if they got holes in them. Um, and then for a while, you would go without shoes until somebody noticed and put shoes on you that fit you, maybe. Oh boy. Okay. Yukiyuma was a little man. Like most Hopi people in those days, he stood no taller than 5 feet and weighed at most 90 pounds. Hey, my people. Like, I weigh more than 90 pounds, but I'm not tall. He was never a physical threat, and except for hunting, never carried a weapon. Mahogany skinned, naked except for a breechcloth, and looking half-starved, he sat this day in the government agent's swivel chair, his knees doubled under his chin, and his skinny arms folded around them. His position was like that of a child in its mother's womb, And it was symbolic since as an adult he lived heart and soul in the womb of Mother Earth. Only 3 years before, the United States and its European allies had won a great war against Germany. It was one in which Hopi men, even though they could not vote, were forced to fight. Yukiyuma thought about that while he smiled pleasantly at two white men, an army colonel named Scott and the agency superintendent named Crane, who stood to one side and talked about him. Any traditionalist who knew the Hopi prophecies could have told them years before that the Great War was coming and even who it would be fought against. Their ancestors learned about the earth shaking engagement from Masao 800 years before it started and handed down from generation to generation an astonishing amount of even more important information having to do with the Hopis and the world. They were ready to tell all of these things to the first whites to come to Hopi country in the 1800s. But when they experienced how the whites behaved towards them, they decided against it. In consequence, information that was not intended to be a secret became one. That's what I was just saying about how it's amazing that even though everybody persecuted them, in the end, they're still putting out this information in the hopes that it helps humanity in some way. The agent made reference to the wrinkled and stained sheet of paper he held in one hand, extending it toward Yukiuma. But the chief shook his head and turned away. While he did not understand their English words, he knew what they were saying about him. Yeah, tell me. Translators had told him that his captors thought he was a filthy, dried up chimpanzee and a mild lunatic who would rather wear a G string than accept the comforts of modern life. Since whoever got Yukiyuma to sign that paper would have a feather in his cap, the government employees kept trying, but his inflexibility and that of his usually gentle followers was frustrating, and it comforted the officials little to know that even when the chief was taken a decade before to Washington, D.C., he was not persuaded in the slightest. White missionaries had sought again and again to sway him, and it accomplished nothing. How, the two men wondered aloud now, had this little spider developed such an impenetrable shell, and why in 14 years of trying had no one been able to crack it? Perhaps he's a child of God. Part of their problem lay in the fact that they let what they saw affect their judgment. They believed that no people who lived as simply and as poorly as the Hopi could possibly offer anything worthwhile to the burgeoning outside world, let alone a message of great magnitude. In particular, they asked themselves, how could a dirty, unkempt, unschooled beggar, the leader of a pacifist people who had accomplished nothing of significance, know anything that was vital to world survival? It was plain to these officials that the only hope the Hopi had was to learn to live as whites. So they had not come to the chief or to any Hopi to listen, and as a result, they failed to learn the secret of living in peace. They never discovered that Yukiyuma's ancestors had made a solemn vow that they would always follow the pattern of life their creator had given them. And they never discovered that included in the vow was the promise that when certain warning signs indicated that the close of the fourth cycle of the world had begun, the Hopis would pass on as specific warnings and a way of survival. But again, for whites, the idea that such information could come from the Hopis was an impossibility. The Creator would never choose such a primitive people for so vital a role in history. That's who He always chooses. That's who the maker always chooses, is the little people, is the houseless people, is the people who stutter and have problems publicly speaking. It is the person who's a little peculiar. It is the tax collector that nobody likes. Like that's who he always chooses. Excuse me. Okay. This is wild. Understandably, and again, this is we're looking again through somebody else's eyes, right? This is a man who has been persecuted greatly. This is a people who has been persecuted greatly. They are very low on trust, if they trust at all at this point. Um, and they're from a different time and age. So, and they're from a different group. So for them, it isn't a hate crime or anything like that to say whites. And they actually have whites capitalized because they're lumping us all as one nation. If you're Caucasian, then you're a white, right? So I just want to make that point that let's not be offended here. Let's try and learn and soak in the information he's trying to relay to us. So it says, understandably, then, when highly educated white anthropologists forced their way into the Hopi worship chambers uh, at the turn of the century, it was to photograph and write about their enchanting primitive rituals. They were certain that in capturing these picturesque and esoteric ceremonies, they were recording the only thing that was really important about the Hopis. When the natives saw that the intruders' minds were closed to anything else, they withheld information of utmost value to the earth and its inhabitants. See what happens from pride, not being willing to listen and share information in, both ways there. Silence became the standard response to any questions about Hopi understandings. Here in the agency jail 2 decades later, we see the response in operation again as the scorn of whites for Hopi understandings and ways continues. Yukiyuma concludes that, like the scientist, the colonel, and the agent, do not deserve to hear the secret of blending with the land and celebrating life. He intuitively knows the time still has not come to tell the outside world what it desperately needs to know. The scrawny chief did hint at it one day when he said to the agent, "You see, I am doing this as much for you as for my own people. Suppose I should not protest your orders. Suppose I should willingly accept the ways of the Bahanas. Immediately, the great snake would turn over and the sea would rush in and we would all be drowned. You too. I am therefore protecting you." I understand what he's saying there. Actually, I have to say that as a believer in salvation that, men are fallen and we need to be refined and shaped and, throughout our walk here and our journey. And that can only happen in cooperation. It is an act of willful cooperation and acceptance, your salvation, and it's a process. But I understand what he's saying there by like, I'm protecting you too. That's what I feel like I'm doing, every time you sit down and pray for lost family members, right? Or what if we all, everybody who does pray, what if we all stopped praying at the same time? What would happen? Because we're keeping our mind on heavenly things, we're praying protection over our families and our communities, insofar as we're authorized to do. So, what do you think would happen if we all stopped, pulled back, and stopped doing that all at once? It's kind of the same. I see that. So this quiet day in history ended and time moved on. A second world war that was also predicted came and went. In truth, prophecies of all kinds were being fulfilled regularly, and the traditionalist Hopis knew it. Even seeing that the countries of the world were moving ever deeper into trouble didn't move them to reveal what they knew. They kept the greater part of their secret to themselves. After Yukiyuma died, his son Dan K wrote a little book in 1972 that outlined some of the principal thoughts of The Secret, but that was all. Writers Frank Waters and Mika Titiev gathered small bits of information about The Secret during their years with the Hopis. After they wrote what they knew about it, it was a tantalizing mystery known to exist, but whose details were still hidden. Hopi delegations went 4 times to the United Nations headquarters in New York City, where they tried without success to tell the secret to its members. Hold, please. This is what video 2 was focused on. We talked about the Hopi going to the United Nations and begging them for more than 30 seconds to speak and to be invited as a regular contributor at the United Nations. So, over an 11-year period, 5 of the elder traditionalists wrote a newsletter to warn other Hopis about the consequences of abandoning the secret. But so many of the people had embraced white beliefs and ways that the effort fell on deaf ears. The tribal council controlled the schools, money, and the jobs now, and that was all that mattered. Hold, please. It would also be like, in a material sense, it would be like, food what if every farmer, let's get to the roots. What if every farm suddenly stopped producing? That would affect everybody. And the Hopi traditionalists, in their mind, heart, soul, and spirit, they don't believe, they know that they are the only thing holding back this wave of bad mojo, so to speak, that could come in, right? And I've hinted at some of this again. every time I've gotten more information just sitting down and asking God and praying on it and receiving an answer in my heart and having, then I go research and confirm if this is a thing or not, right? And no, I don't implicitly trust Google either. You got to be discerning. Okay, so the tribal council controlled the school's money and the jobs now, and that was all that mattered. 75 years of silence flowed slowly by like a meandering river. One by one, the keepers of the secret left this world, taking what they knew about the secret with them, and went to live with the Kachina spirits. Meanwhile, the more fortunate areas of the outside world prospered richly, but at the cost of mistakes, the consequences of which accumulated in time to the point of threatening its very life. I mean, look at all the oil spills we have. Look at the trash islands that we have, because plastic lasts for something like 200 years. It's bad. Like our daily existence, how we you don't have to leave the house today. You could just sit at home on your couch and you are still creating a deficit to the earth, to the environment. Like it's just the truth of the matter. And the more people say, well, I don't want to hear this. Well, I don't want to focus on this. Well, I don't care because I won't be here. You're a crummy person. Like, I just want to say you're a crummy person for thinking things like that. Anyways, okay. They also became listeners. The creator and Masao observed this and set certain wheels in motion at Hopi land. Then one day in May 1993, I answered an invitation to come to the remote Hopi reservation and meet the man who would turn out to be the last remaining keeper of the secret, the only person still alive who knew everything about it and was able to pass it on. 100 years old at that time, he was so like Yukiyuma in size and attitude, it was amazing. And the second day after we met, he chose to give me the secret to give to you. On hearing it, I knew immediately that it stands with the most important revelations ever given by the Creator. For among other things, it tells us why certain events are happening in the world today, what is coming soon, and how we can influence and survive it. This secret includes awesome prophecies, sublime instructions, and dire warnings that together make up a unique survival kit. In the midst of what is happening now and is certain to occur in the near future, it can enrich and save your life, rescue the earth, and is quite probably the only thing that can deliver the world from extinction. Wow, those are bold claims to live up to. Hold please while I get a drink of water. Thank you so much. Hopi Land, situated in the northeastern corner of Arizona, is so old and so infused with spiritual life that it is hallowed ground. It is bathed in an aura of the sacred and carries with it an ever present possibility of the unexpected. Visiting there does strange things to your senses, and the minute you cross the reservation border, something unusual begins to happen to you. It is as though you have moved into a different time frame and are in touch with a myriad of new senses and deities. As my friend Catherine Cheshire and I traveled toward it from Flagstaff, Arizona, in her 4x4 on an afternoon in May 1993, my mind was a jumble of thoughts, most of which appeared to me at the time to have little to do with Hopis. I knew nothing about Yukiyuma and nothing of consequence about the secret. Most of my meandering thoughts were what most people would, had they been there to hear them, believe to be far fetched. Among other things, I reflected on the fact that in numerous countries, the world is in its most serious trouble ever today. Facing this global emergency is a first priority for everyone. Oh, come on now. And without asking myself why I should even have any such ideas at this particular time, I found myself wondering whether my visit to this ancient, remote, and honored place might have anything to do with that. Before long, the first of the flat topped red and brown mesas that identify the reservation area began to loom in the distance, and overhead in the deep blue sky, a few white clouds followed us, as though there were Hopi Kachinas in them who were watching us. The highway was flat, the asphalt paving was in good condition, and the curves were broad. The truck did not sway, yet I shifted around in my seat like an anxious child and clung tightly to the padded handle bolted to the roof. I sensed that I was on the verge of something important, yet hadn't the remotest idea what it was or why I should even think about it. A half hour later, we rounded a bend and headed northwest, not northwest, northwest, not going far before Catherine slowed the truck down. I noted that we were just across from the place where the village of Kay's Main Street meets the highway. As she deftly turned the truck off the highway and in the opposite direction, I looked back at the village. Except for the somewhat imposing box like and rust colored tribal headquarters building, Kikatsumovi was in no way impressive. Judging by its architecture, you would never know that Hopis even lived there. As we bumped along at 5 miles an hour over as rough and jarring a dirt road as anyone is ever going to experience, I found myself wondering again whether or not the invitation was a coincidence or fated. I have mixed feelings about such things as fate, but in light of all that's happened since then, I see nothing accidental in it, including the timing. If the trip had waited until now, none of the things that have been accomplished since then could have been done, and the future of the world would have been for you and me a far worse one than it will be. Huh. Come and help us, Manuel H's letter had pleaded as a follow up to two lengthy telephone conversations. Help these particular Hopis with what? I found myself asking. What could I do for them that they couldn't do for themselves? If there were serious problems, I hadn't learned anything about them during the time when, 10 years earlier, I had visited the reservation on numerous occasions while I was researching what became my 2 volume series on the Pueblo Indians. The dangers of being only an outside observer can be seen here. The festering problems and searing divisions at Hopi escaped me entirely. More importantly, I did not learn anything at all about the sacred covenant. Interesting that they call it the sacred covenant, like Christ followers, like LDS. They actually have that exact phrase, I think, and the critical need to proclaim its message to the world. This time, though, the situation would be different. I would be visiting Covenant Land itself, the western end of the reservation, where Hopis live on the third of 3 mesas that contain the 12 Hopi villages. 12, like 12 tribes. Here out in the quiet farming lands of the village and under a pale summer moon, I would on this very night meet the man who, above all, I had come to see. Although he is an exceptional individual, he is much too humble to think of himself in this way. Since most of you will probably never meet in person an ancient gladiator whose only armor is that of Masao, and whose only weapon is peace, I want to describe this one to you. His name is Dan Evehema. Born in Old Orabi in 1893, he has a deeply etched and mahogany-colored face that is topped by a thick and unruly mane of silver-colored hair. He stands amazingly straight as a result of a century of hard work, squares his broad shoulders like a marine standing at attention. But he speaks of himself and other elderly elders as gnarled old roots. In appearance and toughness, he surely is that. Yet he is a root filled with remarkable energy for his venerable age, having a quick mind, a ready smile, and dark eyes that sparkle whenever he laughs, which is often. Like the Hopis of old, Dan Evehema is a peaceful and happy man, qualities which defy the fact that he has been honed by adversity. His entire life has been plagued by unfair intrusions of the worst possible kind. I was astounded to learn that he still works in his fields every day, either alone or side by side with white friends and Hopi relatives who plant, cultivate, and harvest corn and other crops. He is also a well known medicine person and healer. And when he is not farming or healing, he is actively engaged at Hotavella village with the other members of his Roadrunner and Greasewood clan in ceremonial or political activities. In these, he is always a leader and undoubtedly the most knowledgeable man present. See, they're the leaders because they're the elders, because they have the most wisdom and information. They're not tossed aside or shut away where no one can see them. People appreciate, even if they do become even disabled, you know, they're carried where they need to go then. And you can read stories that are older about certain situations that take place or took place, um, where white people were side by side with Native Americans and, fought with them or against them sometimes, learned to be friends under the most adverse situations. But the elders were revered because they were elders because they were wise enough to stay alive until then, right? To take care of their bodies and temples until then, and also for the wisdom or the knowledge, the truth that they had gathered over those years, and they had the wisdom to apply that knowledge. That's something that someone with less experience and more naive might not have, is the wisdom in this area or that area to understand how to apply knowledge to your everyday life. And that's why I like to stay solution centered, and that's why I thought we could look at this so we understand, there are different ways to walk through this life regardless of what we were told or how we were raised. This isn't the only way to do things. And just because living in little boxes is the way it's been done, in our most recent history, that doesn't mean that this is the only way or even the right way. Excuse me. And as I said, tribes would get together and trade together in times of peace. They knew that they needed each other. People need people. Okay, so however he has lived and whatever he has practiced over the past 100 years has sustained him in fountain of youth fashion remarkably well, and it is worth looking into. I do that under the heading the Ark's instructions, and what we learned there has everything to do with survival. Okay, so you're not gonna there's no headings for the chapters, so that makes this a little difficult. Dan is cared for by his sister's daughter, Susie L., who is herself an exceptional person, a wonderful carver of Kachina dolls, and among the staunchest of the younger traditionalists. Dan lives on his ancestral property with Susie, her two children, and her Navajo husband, just 6 or so miles, a trip made infinitely longer by the roughness of the road, from Keoksmovi. Oh, that reminds me. I snapped a picture while I was at the consignment shop of this one individual's stuff, like, because there's different spots. And this one had Shriner hats, but there was also an ID that was put in like a glass case, like you used to do with maybe your softball or baseball awards or soccer or whatever. There's a picture, it's an ID, and I took a picture of it and I'll show it to you in another video or I'll post it because my phone just died. But it has a picture of his, what is it called? Oh, the World's Fair, and I think it's the New York one, but I thought it was cool, I took a picture of it, but beneath that, the same person who has the Shriner, hats, there were Hopi dolls, and so I snapped a picture of, like I said, like, this display case, and I'll post it for you guys to check it out. Talk about synchronicities. Okay, so their flat-roofed house is a small by most outside world standards, it is a patched together building made in its oldest part of mortared sandstones. In its youngest part, it consists of plywood, a tar paper, and any other material that has been conveniently at hand. None of it is painted and none is finished off, except for a propane stove and a gasoline driven generator that provides small amounts of electricity for short periods of time. There are none of the conveniences of the modern world takes for granted. No running water, ugh, no lights except in the kitchen, no air conditioning, and no indoor plumbing facilities. No one in the family has their own bedroom. Winter heat comes from a single pot-bellied stove located in the living room. The furniture has seen better days, and the upholstered pieces are covered by blankets. Despite the limitations, everyone is happy at Dan's home, and it is a warm place to visit. Many people do, both Hopis and outsiders. Whatever food is available is freely shared, and there is seldom a time when someone does not come from near or far to visit with Dan and Susie. If there are no guests present, Dan goes out alone in the late afternoon to pray to Masel, asking him to watch over the family through the night. In the chapters ahead, you will learn who exactly this important deity is and how he goes about this watching. If the generator has fuel, Dan and the family might watch a little television to see what is going on in the world. Otherwise, he goes to bed shortly after sundown. He is up at sunrise and goes out to pray to the Creator to guide him through the day. He does this at the foot of the mesa where Ivahema family members have prayed for generations. Then he has breakfast. Dan has an excellent appetite that is kindled by Susie's expertly cooked food. Susie has a robust son whose craving for food is as ravenous as that of most growing boys. While we were eating one morning, I noticed that he had his eye on several links of sausage that still sat on a plate that was in the middle of the table, but he wanted to be polite and bided his time before making his move. When he did, he was chagrined to find that Dan had already wolfed him down. Dan's farming fields are across the road from the house and readily accessible. He can walk to them in a few minutes. They lie in a broad and flat wash that collects the rainwater as it comes rushing down from the plateau above. The rich and fertile sandy soil, so fine a handful of it feels like silk, absorbs the water like a sponge. Once the corn has been planted, the moisture that is already settled in the wash give it its first boost towards the surface. You see, he's teaching you throughout the book. There is a separate ranch extension where livestock is raised, courtesy of the Peabody coal mine, which is exhausting the underground water as it uses it to transport the coal to a processing plant in Nevada. The watering basin has gone dry, and with hand watering the only alternative, this part of Dan's work has diminished considerably. Oh. Except for moderate dress clothing and a limited amount of silver jewelry donned on festive days, he wears the plain work outfits of ranch hands or farmers everywhere. The plain, or wait, where is it? Checkered woolen shirts with long sleeves, belted Levi pants with rolled up cuffs, and heavy work shoes. Now and then he uses a colorful bandana or a cap to hold his hair in place. In the winter, he adds a hip length black woolen coat with a rolled collar and a knitted wool hat. For a century, Dan has lived off this land and has been self sufficient his whole life. Still to this, well, to this day, to the modern day, completely off the land except for a few little things here and there. That is wild. Money is of little consequence to him. You don't need money when you know how to provide for yourself. I couldn't believe it. One of the young men that I had worked with, that I actually still pray for all the time, he he said something like, I said, "Nah, I'm not going any further with the system. I don't think like I'm not going to be getting chipped or any of that stuff." And he said something like, "Well," I said, "I don't even really like having a bank account anymore." And he said, "Well, what would you do?" I said, "What do you mean, what would I do?" He says, "Well, how would you eat?" I says, "Young man, I know how to fish." And I said, "There's food everywhere. It grows on trees and it grows in the ground." And he supposedly was a farmer of some kind, but I don't know. It was just strange to me the way how would you live? Differently, but I would live, you know? It just amazes me. Okay. So, as you would accept, there have been other outstanding male Hopis among the elderly elders, but all except one of these have put on the cloud mask and gone to live with the Kachina spirits. I introduced you to some of the most notable in Chapter 3. Through long years of personal experience with each of them, along with some traditionalist Hopi women, became an eloquent keeper and source of information about traditional Hopi feelings and history. To say what I do about Dan is one thing, to be with him is another, for he has an aura of profound spirituality about him. When his eyes capture yours, they look so deeply into you that you feel nothing is hidden from him. When in the 1970s, I was with my friend Fool's Crow, the last ceremonial chief of the Teton Sioux, and at Pine Ridge, South Dakota, wrote the story of his remarkable life. I thought I would never again meet a Native American equal to him, but Dan Evahema is. Eve is in his name. That's interesting. He and Fool's Crow have to be counted among the greatest of the Native American leaders to live during this 20th century. Although Fool's Crow died in 1989, he is steadily gaining this reputation both at home and in the outside world. Okay, so. mm, Okay, now we get into. I was going to say I could skip ahead, but he's going to get into me, like why he's there in a second. Although Fool's Crow died in 1989, he is steadily gaining this reputation both at home and in the outside world. Dan is not looking for honors, but his will nevertheless come in due time. Just want you to have the sense of him before we move on and to be able to see him in your mind's eye when you reflect on the material that follows. He's given us background that's actually essential. You need to know who you're getting information from. You need to actively listen to them. And if it's a public person, especially, a public persona, you need to like investigate them and see, and everybody makes mistakes. Has a past. I don't mean that. I mean, who are their sponsors? Like, who are they paid by, right? Like, who's paying them and that type of thing. Catherine and I met late that evening with Dan, Susie, and two other Hopi men Dan had invited. It was a smaller group than I expected, but I learned later that Dan wanted the meeting to be private. One of these men was Manuel Hoyangawa. The other one, whom I will not name, was to my surprise overbearing and dominated the conversation from the minute we started. I wonder if he's someone well known then. Most of all, he made it painfully clear that he considered himself to be the spokesman for the traditionalists, and that any outsider who helped them would be of his choosing and subject to his authority. Oy, here we go with the infighting. Since I was not one of these, he concluded that this meeting would be the end of it. I was puzzled because I had read about his efforts on behalf of the traditionalists and assumed he was as concerned about the situation as anyone. When he finished and the others said nothing, Catherine and Susie were plainly upset, and I concluded that I had wasted my time coming. So I said very little in reply and resolved that I would return to California the next day. By then, and in spite of my wondering about so many things on the way in, I was in a who needs them mood and ready to bail out. Dan was quiet also and seemed to be dozing much of the time. That didn't help me either. But once the two men had left and before we parted company, Dan roused himself, laid his hand on my arm in a comforting way, and said in a very friendly manner that he would talk with me in the morning. Encouraged by that promise, I had a good night's sleep in the trailer home Catherine keeps on the property. I was up early, the air was crisp, and there was no wind. It was one of those clear and sparkling days that are so typical of the high mesa country. As I walked around the property, the rich smell of sage, juniper, and cedar hung on my shoulders like a heavy and pungent cloak. I was followed by two short haired mongrel dogs, one black and one brown, who were decidedly curious as to who I was. I ignored their sniffing as best I could while I paused to look at the ruins of ancient stone houses on the mesa side and top above. Coming as I do from an urban area, I was particularly aware of how silent it was. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed this tranquility when I was at the first and second Mesa villages a decade earlier. We city dwellers grow so accustomed to noise that we are puzzled when there isn't any. But silence is still a pervading characteristic of Hopi land. It is something that comes from soil when they begin their ceremonial cycle. In all but the most modernized villages, the people walk softly and talk in muted tones. A feeling of overwhelming reverence permeates the air. There is the uncanny sensation that the spirits of generations past are hovering around and influencing what the people think and do. Perhaps it is the antiquity of the aging villages. I'm not certain what it is, but I do know that when no one is looking, you have a powerful urge to touch the stone walls that in themselves testify to eternal things. In Old Arabi itself, you can touch walls nearly 1,000 years old. Where else, other than in Pueblo ruins, can you do this in America today? And again, that tells you who these people are in truth. The LDS Church knows. The dogs followed me to the house and sat down to wait while I went in. After a Bahana type family style breakfast Susie prepared in her cluttered kitchen, which is really the center of the house, we stayed at the kitchen table and talked. I was pleased to learn that Dan had not been dozing at all at the meeting the night before and admired my restraint. In fact, he thought it was an admirable quality, very Hopi like, and the best thing I could have done under the circumstances. It seems that the unnamed gentleman who spoke was not representing Dan at all. He was only representing himself. I understood, though, why he had been invited to the meeting. He lives in Kyokutsmovi and is a much traveled, flamboyant individual. Other than as a spectator, however, he does not participate in the ceremonial life at Hotavilla and does not provoke adverse relationships with the tribal council. He is therefore sort of a cross section of what is going on. Nevertheless, Dan considers him a friend and wanted to gauge his reaction to meeting with me. As you will see, Dan had already made up his mind about what needed to be done. He was just measuring things to see how it might all fit together. His status is such that no one else is in a position to tell him what he will or will not do or say. He has, we outsiders might say, paid his dues and earned his spurs. That is why other traditionalists refer to him as a high priest, and why any filmmaker or writer who comes to Hopi land would give most anything to woo Dan's participation in whatever they hope to do. Even Lee Jenkins, the assertive director of the Hopi Official of Cultural Preservation, knows that where Hopi religion is concerned, there is no one else who can compare with him. Manuel was invited because he had issued the formal invitation to me as a leader in training, and because he has become one of the official spokesmen for the traditionalists. Dan wanted him to at least sense what was about to happen. He was and is hoping that Manuel will measure up to his potential as a leader of the traditionalists who will need to carry on traditional ways after Dan departs. At this point, I learned from Dan the true magnitude of the problems faced by the traditionalists at Haute Villa and what type of help they needed. The village had begun as the place where the covenant was preserved, and among other things, the cycle of yearly activities kept the world in balance with enough harmony to survive. It became a mother village, a shrine, a microcosm of the world, and the home of the last keepers of the covenant of the greatest magnitude. See, I wonder when these people are like, how many are left and how many died? Because if it's like 2017, 2018, it just fits right in to everything else that's occurring. And in prayer, God was the one that told me that the Native Americans do certain rituals that keep, I don't know what to call them, certain entities from the woods from, interfering with humankind. Um, and now that very clearly is no more. Just in the last 2 days, there have been attacks in national parks, and somebody else is missing again. Like camping is the worst thing. Everything I love is being attacked, and I don't know if they're just trying to scare us so that we don't go out there, right? Like reverse psychology because they're stripping the land and taking the resources, or if these things are actually happening, because they always air bad news. If it's the truth, they don't care. If it's bad and it's like shocking, they'll put that on there. Okay, so let's see where we're at here. When does we got into here. Okay. 3 minutes, 13 hours and 3 minutes left in the book. It's a long book. We'll read a little bit more. Long before Dan and Susie finished telling me about these astonishing developments, any thought of leaving had evaporated as I sat spellbound. I learned also that he had seen some of my books, including The Pueblo Children of the Earth Mother, and liked them. In truth, my books had stimulated him to ask me to do the traditionalist Hopis a special and vital favor. Being more qualified than any other Hopi to make the request, he told me how very much he wanted me to write a book that would deliver this secret message to the world. In his mind, the decision to make this request came even before I arrived, for he knew something incredible about himself that made it necessary. He believed my book would be an answer to years of the traditionalist prayers, that it was part of the Creator's plan. The book would accomplish the one thing the elders themselves had not been able to do. Since he did not say so at the time, this something incredible Dan knew about himself only later became clear to me. Of the more than 100 amazing Hopi prophecies given to the Hopis in AD 1100, one of them points directly to Dan Evehema. Fascinating. That may seem to be a far-fetched claim, but when you have read the Hopi Survival Kit, you will agree that the prophecies include this last of the ancient gladiators. In the final chapter, I tell you which prophecy it is and why Dan is the one who is designated there. The reason I mention it now is that he recognized this himself, and it was why he knew the Hotevilla book had to be written. When I visited him just a few weeks ago to deliver this first printed copy of the book, he said he had leafed through its pages. This is good. I'm the last one. All of the rest are gone. Oh, that's sad. Perhaps you can imagine what it would be like to be singled out for such an honor and then bear the weight of fulfilling it. As we talked that first time, it became apparent that if we did not dodge issues, such a book as we were considering could stir up a hornet's nest of responses on the reservation, particularly from those who do not want public to know that there is controversy and skullduggery. Ooh, a mystery is afoot. Specifically, these would be the Hopi Tribal Council and the Office of Cultural Preservation, who are described by the traditionalists as two-hearteds who seek to live in two worlds at once, as opposed to one-hearteds who follow the single covenant path. Oh, that's tough. Do not be, what does Jesus tell us? Do not be lukewarm. Be either hot or be cold. I would rather you be cold than to be lukewarm, he says even. Um, and the Bible also matches that as well. Again, when it says, be of one mind, for a man who is double-minded in all his ways and all his dealings, right? So that hits home. Like, he's right about that. Okay. Two-Hearteds include the council's most avid supporters, together with the officials of several U.S. government agencies and those whites called Bahanas by the traditionalists who still seek to take advantage of the Hopis. Considering the opponents involved, I believe that if what we were doing became known, Dan and Susie surely would be harassed and threatened. They agreed that this would happen, so Dan, Susie, Catherine, and I made a pact of secrecy. We would say nothing to anyone else about the book until we were ready to print it. If the council moved to do anything drastic, then a whole lot of people in the world would know why, and the council would face their wrath. I wish you could have seen the four of us there in that quiet, remote place, clasping hands like a group of conniving conspirators as we made our vow. Cultures miles apart, a solemn old Hopi root, his equally determined niece, and two somber whites who knew how privileged they were to be a part of what was going on. However melodramatic that moment was, it was a bargain we kept until the book Dan and I co-authored, Hotavilla, Hopi, Shrine of the Covenant, Microcosm of the World, was printed in November 1995. So that's the first book. A different book. Anyways, most valuable of the things Dan gave me to work with were copies of newsletters entitled Tekwa, Ikachi, Land and Life. 2 were all he had in his home, but there were more. He told me that they were part of 44 issues that 4 other elders and he had put together during the years from 1975 to 1986. That's wild. That's like the third time I've seen 444 today. Okay, I'm going to stop there now because and it gets into prophecies, instructions, and warnings. So if we look real quick, you see how the chapters aren't really named or numbered? Chapter 2, the amazing story. Let's go through them before I stop this one. The amazing story, part 2. The amazing story, part 3. Come on now. Beauty behind the mask. Saw. Okay. Okay, so chapter 5 is kind of where we want to like get to the meat of it, it looks like. 6. Prophecies past and present is 6. So we could start in chapter 5. I didn't know, like I should have done this at the beginning, but it's all right because I wanted to read that other book to you a little bit as well. More prophecies presently being fulfilled. The Ark's instructions. The survival record of the traditionalist Hopi is a remarkable one. The great secret of survival is a surpassing gift. Huh. Okay. 9 is the Ark's instructions, part 2. The Ark's warnings, chapter 10. And 11 is the twist in the secret. Interesting. Okay, so if you guys want to read this one or the other one first, let me know in the comments which one. And if as soon as we get back to this one, the Hopi book, we'll start in chapter 5. Because some of this other stuff, the background, I wanted you guys to hear about Dan, but the other stuff like the UN and all that, and the council meetings, we went over that in part 2. That was part of that. That's how we found this book. So we're just going to skip to chapter 5 the next time that we read out of this book. But we will read both eventually, God willing. If you want to read this one first or this one, just let me know in the comment section. Thank you guys for being here. I don't know what's going on with the shorts because they were doing really good, but I do still upload them. So check those out if you've missed any, if you want to catch up on Sammy's antics. And I got a couple of little girls to upload. She's a chime weenie, so she's like all over the place. Anyways, you guys have a blessed day, and we will talk soon. As soon as I get over here. There we go. Thank you for being here.